The autumn wind carried dust and secrets through Redemption Springs on the morning Eleanor Wilhelm decided to spend every penny she owned on a condemned man. September 28, 1886. The kind of day that starts with coffee and ends with choices you can never take back. Eleanor stood at the edge of the town square, one hand pressed against the swell of her belly, the other clutching a worn leather coin purse. 7 months and 3 weeks pregnant. Close enough to feel the baby move. Close enough that every step was a calculated risk. She had counted the money 17 times since dawn. $150 from Thomas's life insurance policy. $50 from selling her wedding jewelry to a pawnbroker who knew she was desperate and paid accordingly. $200 total. Everything she had left in the world. The town square smelled of unwashed bodies and broken dreams. Silas Monroe, the auctioneer, stood on a wooden platform that had seen better days. His voice carried across the crowd with the practiced enthusiasm of a man selling human beings for a living. This was the law in Montana Territory. Indentured servitude for those who couldn't pay their debts or their crimes. 5 years, 10 years, sometimes life. Bodies sold to the highest bidder. Labor extracted until the debt was settled, or the debtor was dead, whichever came first. 3 men had already been sold that morning. A farmer who'd defaulted on his land loan. A horse thief, too old to hang. A drunk who'd stabbed a man over a card game and lived to regret it. Eleanor watched each transaction with her heart climbing higher in her throat. She needed to save her bid, save her money. Because the man she'd come for was still waiting in the holding pen behind the platform. She could see him through the gaps in the wooden slats. Tall, lean, shoulders that spoke of hard labor and harder years. His hands were shackled, but his head was unbowed. Gideon Thorne. The name alone made people whisper. The Stillwater Killer, they called him. The mountain man who'd murdered a United States Marshal in cold blood and shown no remorse. Sentenced to 15 years of servitude, though most figured he wouldn't survive 5. Eleanor knew better. She knew exactly who Gideon Thorne was, what he'd done, what he'd been accused of doing, and most importantly, what he was innocent of. The knowledge sat heavy in her chest, right next to the grief that had been her constant companion since they'd pulled Thomas's body from the ashes of their home. Silas Monroe called for the next lot. His voice cut through Eleanor's thoughts like a blade through butter. Lot 47. The crowd shifted, parted, made room for the condemned man as 2 deputies hauled him onto the platform. Gideon Thorne stood in the morning sun and looked like exactly what he was. Dangerous, unrepentant. Capable of violence in a way that made civilized people nervous. A scar ran from his left eyebrow down to his jawline. Not clean, not surgical. The kind of scar you got from a knife fight where both parties walked away, bleeding. His eyes swept the crowd, dark, calculating, taking inventory of who might buy him and for what purpose. Then his gaze found Eleanor. For 3 full heartbeats, the world stopped turning. Recognition flashed across his face. Shock, then something darker. Something that looked like rage or grief, or both twisted together until you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Eleanor's hand tightened on her coin purse. She hadn't been sure he would recognize her. They'd only met twice. Once at Thomas's wedding to Julia. Once at Julia's funeral. 8 years was a long time. People changed. Faces aged. Memories faded. But not this one. Not this face. Not this recognition that felt like touching a live wire. Silas Monroe droned on about Gideon's crimes. Convicted of murdering United States Marshal Eugene Frost. Killed him in a saloon in Stillwater over a gambling dispute, or so the official record claimed. Showed no remorse. A danger to civilized society. Sentenced to 15 years indentured servitude to work off the blood debt. Opening bid $50. The crowd went silent. This was the moment where economics met fear. $50 for 15 years of labor from a strong man in his prime, a bargain by any measure. But who wanted a convicted killer sleeping in their barn, working their fields close enough to put a knife in your back when you weren't looking. The silence stretched, became uncomfortable. Silas looked annoyed. A voice called out from the back, rough, male. A farmer who needed hands for harvest and figured a desperate man in chains was better than no man at all. $50. The bid hung in the air. Gideon's face showed nothing. He might have been carved from granite for all the emotion he displayed. Another voice, a mine owner this time. $75. He could use a man who wasn't afraid of danger, use him until he broke, then bury him in the dark where nobody asked questions. Eleanor felt the baby kick, a sharp jab against her ribs, a reminder that time was running out, that she had 48 hours to get to Helena and submit Thomas's evidence before Judge Langford dismissed the land fraud case, that she had maybe 2 weeks before this baby decided to come into a world that wanted both of them dead. She stepped forward. The crowd parted like water around a stone. $100. Her voice carried clear and strong across the square. Heads turned. People stared. She could see the questions forming in their eyes. Widow Wilhelm, Thomas's wife. What was she doing bidding on a murderer? The mine owner hesitated, then raised again. $125. He wanted Gideon. Wanted that strong back and those calloused hands down in the dark where screaming wouldn't carry. Eleanor didn't hesitate. $200. The words came out steady. Final. The kind of bid that said she was willing to bet everything on this one desperate gamble. Gasps rippled through the crowd. $200 was a fortune, more than most men earned in a year. Enough to buy a small ranch or start a business or live comfortably for months. The mine owner shook his head, backed down. He wasn't that desperate. Silas Monroe looked at Eleanor like she'd lost her mind. Going once, going twice. His gavel came down with the finality of a coffin nail, sold to Mrs. Wilhelm for $200. The crowd buzzed with speculation. Eleanor ignored them. She walked toward the platform on legs that felt like they might give out at any moment. Climbed the 3 steps slowly, one hand on the rail, the other pressed against her belly. Gideon watched her approach. His face was still a mask. But his eyes were alive with questions and accusations and something that might have been grief. Sheriff Tobias Crenshaw stepped forward. Mid-40s, honest in the way that small-town lawmen could afford to be when the real power lived elsewhere. He looked at Eleanor with concern that seemed genuine. Mrs. Wilhelm, you understand what you're buying here? This man killed a federal marshal. Eleanor met his gaze without flinching. I understand the charge, Sheriff. That's not the same as the truth. The sheriff's eyebrows went up. Gideon's jaw tightened. Nobody else caught it, but Eleanor saw the way his breath changed, the way his shoulders shifted. He knew. He knew she'd found something. The paperwork took 20 minutes. Eleanor signed her name in spaces that made her responsible for Gideon's actions, made her liable if he ran or killed someone, or committed any crime while under her ownership. Ownership. The word tasted like ashes in her mouth. The sheriff's office was small, cramped. It smelled of old coffee and older tobacco. Gideon stood against the wall, still shackled, while Eleanor completed the transaction. The sheriff counted her money twice, looked at the bills like he expected them to disappear. Then he handed Eleanor a receipt and turned to remove Gideon's chains. I'll need a few minutes alone with him, Eleanor said. Her voice was calm, controlled, nothing like the chaos spinning inside her chest. The sheriff hesitated. Eleanor could see him weighing duty against decency, against the fact that she was a pregnant widow who'd just spent a fortune on a convicted killer and might actually know what she was doing. 5 minutes, he said finally. I'll be right outside. The door closed. The lock didn't turn. Sheriff Crenshaw was giving them privacy, not isolation. Eleanor waited until his footsteps faded. Then she turned to face Gideon Thorne for the first time in 8 years. He spoke first. Just her name. Eleanor. But the way he said it carried 8 years of history, 8 years of betrayal and grief and rage that had never quite burned itself out. She wanted to collapse, Wanted to sit down and cry and let someone else carry this weight for 5 goddamn minutes. But she couldn't. Not yet. Not until she'd said what needed saying. Why, Gideon asked, one word. A lifetime of questions packed into 3 letters. Eleanor took a breath. Let it out slowly. Because Thomas is dead, and you're the only family I have left. The words landed like a punch. Gideon's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Disbelief, anger, something that might have been pain before he locked it down. Family. The word came out bitter, mocking. Thomas stole my inheritance. Stole the woman I loved. He stopped himself, looked at Eleanor's belly. The unspoken accusation hung between them. And now his widow buys me like cattle. What's your angle? Eleanor's hands were shaking. She clasped them together, pressed them against her stomach where the baby was doing gymnastics. My angle is that I found your letter, the one Thomas hid, the one that proves you didn't kill Marshall Frost. Gideon went very still, the kind of still that predators get right before they strike. Eleanor pulled a folded paper from her pocket, worn, creased, stained with smoke from the fire that had killed her husband. She'd found it in Thomas's safe deposit box, the one the bank manager had given her after the funeral. The letter was dated 2 weeks before Marshall Frost's death, written in Gideon's hand, sent from Denver. In it, Gideon asked Thomas for legal advice, asked if there was any way to challenge the sale of their parents' land, asked if Thomas might be willing to talk, to maybe find a way past the bitterness. The postmark proved Gideon had been in Denver on the night Marshall Frost died in Stillwater, 300 miles away. Physically impossible for him to have committed the murder. Thomas knew, Eleanor said quietly. He knew you were innocent, and he let you rot in prison for 8 months anyway. She watched the truth hit Gideon, watched him process what his brother had done, the final betrayal in a lifetime of betrayals. Gideon's voice came out rough, damaged. Why? Not why did Thomas hide it? Why did she bring it now? Why did she spend everything to buy his freedom? Eleanor's voice cracked. I need your help. She told him everything. Told him about Thomas's investigation into land fraud, about forged surveys and stolen Lakota territory and bribes that went all the way to the territorial governor. Told him how Thomas had found proof, documentation that would unravel the entire scheme and send powerful men to prison. Told him about the fire, about waking to smoke and flames and Thomas screaming her name, about the sheriff pulling her from the burning house while Thomas died inside because the door had been barred from the outside. Murder, made to look like an accident. The people who killed him are coming for me, Eleanor said, for this. She touched her belly. The baby moved under her palm. Gideon watched. Something shifted in his expression. You're the only person alive who knows the truth about what Thomas discovered. Gideon was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, softer. What truth? Eleanor glanced at the door, lowered her voice. That Redemption Springs isn't built on honest land. It's built on surveys that were falsified by the Territorial Surveyor's Office, built on claims that were registered before the Lakota Treaty was even signed. Thomas had documents, had testimony from tribal elders, had proof that Governor Langford personally approved land grants that were illegal under federal law. She took a breath. The night he tried to submit it to the federal land office, they burned our house, with him inside. Gideon's eyes narrowed. Why not go to the law? Eleanor looked pointedly at the door, at the sheriff's shadow visible through the frosted glass. The law is owned by the same people who want me dead. Silence, heavy, loaded with implications. Finally, Gideon spoke. You said I'm the only family you have. That's not true. You have whoever put that baby in you. Eleanor flinched. The reaction was small, but Gideon caught it. Caught the way her hand moved protectively over her belly, the way her eyes went hard and bright with unshed tears. That's complicated, she said. Gideon studied her with eyes that had learned to read danger in the wilderness. How complicated. Eleanor opened her mouth to answer. The window exploded inward. Glass and wood splinters filled the air. Gideon moved on instinct. He grabbed Eleanor and pulled her down as bullets punched through the walls. The sheriff's office turned into a killing box. Sheriff Crenshaw crashed through the door, rifle in hand. His eyes went wide at the carnage. 3 riders outside, faces covered with bandanas, firing repeating rifles into the building. "Get to the back," the sheriff shouted. He tossed Gideon a rifle from the rack. "Don't make me regret this." Gideon caught the weapon, checked the load, moved to the window in a crouch. Eleanor crawled toward the back door, hands pressed over her belly, trying to make herself small. The gunfight was brief and brutal. Gideon fired with the kind of precision that spoke of military training. 2 shots. 1 rider dropped from his saddle. The other 2 wheeled their horses and fled in a thunder of hoofbeats. The sheriff ran outside, checked the body, pulled the bandana off the dead man's face. Tommy Greer. Used to work for Wilhelm Mining. Eleanor spoke from the doorway. Her voice was steady despite the trembling in her hands. He was fired 3 weeks ago. Gideon understood immediately. They're cleaning up witnesses. The sheriff looked at Eleanor with new eyes, with understanding that came too late to help. "You need protection. I can put you in the jail, for your own safety." Eleanor shook her head. "No, we're leaving. Tonight." "Where?" "Thomas's law office." "In Helena?" "That's where the real evidence is hidden." Gideon cut in. "Helena is 80 miles. You're in no condition." Eleanor's eyes flashed. "I have 48 hours before Judge Langford rules on the land claim lawsuit. If I don't submit Thomas's evidence by then, the case is dismissed. And everyone who died for this dies for nothing." The steel in her voice surprised Gideon. This wasn't the soft society woman who'd married his brother. This was someone who'd been forged in fire and loss and come out harder. He studied her, really looked at her, saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the determination in the set of her jaw, the way she held herself like she might shatter but refused to bend. "All right," he said finally, "but we do this my way, and you tell me the truth, all of it." Eleanor nodded, starting with who the father of that baby really is. Eleanor's face went pale. Gideon watched the color drain from her cheeks, watched her hand move protectively over her belly. Before she could answer, before she could find the words to explain what had happened, they heard it. Footsteps on the boardwalk outside, slow, deliberate. The kind of footsteps that announced arrival rather than snuck up on people. The sheriff moved to the door, hand on his gun, but when he opened it he stepped back immediately, removed his hat. "Mrs. Langford." Eleanor's world tilted sideways. The woman who stepped into the sheriff's office was elegant in a way that money couldn't buy. Mid-40s, dressed in traveling clothes that cost more than most people earned in 6 months. Her hair was pinned up in a style that had been fashionable in Boston 5 years ago and was still fashionable in Montana because money made its own rules. Margaret Langford, wife of the territorial governor, Eleanor's adoptive mother. "Hello, Eleanor," Margaret said. Her voice was cultured, controlled, hiding everything dangerous underneath. Eleanor couldn't speak, couldn't move. The last time she'd seen her mother was 3 weeks ago at Thomas's funeral. Margaret had stood at the back of the church, never came to the graveside, left before Eleanor could speak to her. Now she was here, in a sheriff's office in Redemption Springs, looking at Eleanor like she was a problem that needed solving. Margaret's eyes moved to Gideon, took in the rifle, the fresh gunpowder residue, the way he stood between Eleanor and the door. "You must be Gideon Thorne, the murderer my daughter purchased today." Gideon's voice was flat. Alleged murderer. Margaret's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, how foolish of me." The sheriff cleared his throat, looked uncomfortable. This was above his pay grade, way above. "Might I have a moment alone with my daughter?" Margaret asked. It wasn't really a question. The sheriff looked at Eleanor. She nodded, numb, still trying to process why her mother was here. Why now? The sheriff left. Gideon stayed. Margaret's eyes moved back to Eleanor, softened slightly. showed something that might have been genuine concern under all the political calculation. "Darling, I came to bring you home." Eleanor found her voice. "I don't have a home, not anymore." Margaret moved closer. Her hand reached out, almost touched Eleanor's arm, stopped just short. "I know you're grieving. Thomas's death was a tragedy. But this vendetta, it has to stop. Vendetta." Eleanor felt something cold settle in her chest. Something that had been frozen for weeks suddenly cracked and started to thaw, started to burn. "Your husband and son murdered Thomas." Margaret flinched. The reaction was small, but Eleanor caught it, caught the flash of pain before the mask came back up. "You don't know what you're saying. I know Victor raped me. I know your husband tried to bribe Thomas into silence. I know they had him killed when he refused." The words came out flat, matter of fact, like she was reading a grocery list instead of detailing the destruction of her life. Margaret's face went pale. For a moment, just a moment, Eleanor saw her mother, saw the woman who'd raised her, who'd bandaged scraped knees and taught her to read and held her when nightmares came. Then the moment passed. The governor's wife returned. "Victor made a terrible mistake. He was drunk. He's getting help." Eleanor laughed. The sound was ugly, broken. "Help! He's being protected, while I'm hunted like an animal." Margaret's voice dropped, became urgent. "Come home, please. We can protect you, protect the baby. You can have everything you need. In exchange for what?" "My silence." Margaret didn't answer, didn't need to. The silence was answer enough. Eleanor felt the baby move, felt the life growing inside her, the life that had been created through violence but existed anyway. Innocent, deserving of better. "In exchange for your life," Margaret said finally. The words hung between them, heavy, final. Margaret moved closer, dropped her voice so Gideon couldn't hear, but Eleanor knew he was listening anyway, knew he caught every word. "The governor is not well. The stress of the investigation, the press, Victor's indiscretions, it's destroying him. If you press forward with this lawsuit, if you expose everything, it won't just destroy him, it will destroy me, your sisters, everything we've built." "Good," Eleanor said. The slap came fast, sharp. Margaret's palm connected with Eleanor's cheek. The sound echoed in the small office. Silence. Shock. Gideon moved forward, but Eleanor held up a hand. Stopped him. Margaret's hand was shaking. Her eyes were bright with tears that she refused to let fall. "I raised you, fed you, clothed you, sent you to the best schools, and this is how you repay me, by destroying your own family." Eleanor touched her cheek, felt the sting, felt something else, something that might have been the last thread of daughterly affection, finally snapping. "You are not my family." Margaret stepped back like she'd been struck again. Her breath caught. For a moment her mask cracked completely. "Do you think this is easy for me? Do you think I don't know what Victor did? What William has done?" Her voice broke. "I know, Eleanor. I've known for months. About the assault, about the land fraud, about all of it. And I've been dying inside trying to figure out how to protect everyone, how to save my son, save my husband, save you." "Then you chose wrong," Eleanor said quietly. "I chose survival. I chose keeping the family together, even if it was broken, even if it was rotten. Because I thought broken family was better than no family." She looked at Eleanor's belly. "But I was wrong. And now my grandchild will be born into the consequences of my cowardice." Margaret moved to the door, paused. "I'm giving you until dawn, not because I want to threaten you, but because I need time. Time to decide if I'm strong enough to do what's right, or if I'm still the woman who chose comfort over courage." She looked back, eyes full of pain. "Pray I find courage, Eleanor, because if I don't, if I choose them over you again, I won't be able to live with what happens next." Eleanor touched her cheek, felt the sting, felt something else, something that might have been the last thread of daughterly affection finally snapping. "You are not my family." The words came out quiet, certain. Margaret recoiled like she'd been hit. I loved you like my own, but I'm not your own. Am I? The question wasn't a question, it was a statement, a truth that had been hiding for 28 years. Gideon's voice cut through the tension. What's she talking about? Eleanor didn't take her eyes off Margaret. Tell him. Tell him what you told me 3 years ago when I asked why I didn't look like anyone in the family. Margaret shook her head, backed toward the door. Eleanor, don't. Eleanor's voice was steady, cold, the voice of someone who had nothing left to lose. I was adopted, found on the steps of a church in Virginia City when I was 3 days old. No note, no name. The Langfords took me in. Gideon was watching both women now, reading the subtext, the history written in their faces. Why does that matter now? He asked. Eleanor pulled a folded document from inside her dress. Worn, stained. She'd been carrying it close to her heart since the day she found it in Thomas's files. Because 2 months ago I found my birth certificate, hidden in Thomas's papers, and I learned the truth. She unfolded the paper, showed it to Gideon, watched his eyes scan the faded ink. Governor William Langford, father, Morning Star, mother. Listed as deceased. Born March 3, 1858. Gideon looked up, understanding dawning on his face. Eleanor turned back to Margaret. Her mother, her adoptive mother, the woman who'd raised the governor's bastard daughter alongside his legitimate children. Governor Langford is my biological father. He had an affair with a Salish woman 28 years ago. When she got pregnant, he paid her to disappear. She left me at the church and vanished. Probably died. Nobody knows. Margaret's tears spilled over now. She made no move to wipe them away. You adopted your husband's bastard to avoid scandal, Eleanor continued. You raised me alongside your real children. And when your son raped me, when Victor did what he did, you chose him over me. Margaret's voice came out broken. I chose my family. Eleanor nodded slowly. So am I. The silence that followed was absolute. Margaret and Eleanor stared at each other across a gulf that could never be bridged. Across 28 years of lies and love and betrayal, so deep it had roots. Finally, Margaret reached into her purse, pulled out a folded document. Sign this. Her voice was flat now. All business. The mother was gone. The governor's wife remained. It's a statement recanting all accusations against Victor, admitting Thomas's death was accidental, withdrawing the land fraud lawsuit. Eleanor looked at the paper, looked at her mother. Or what? Or I testify that you murdered Thomas yourself for his life insurance, that you hired Gideon Thorne to help you, that you're fleeing prosecution. Eleanor felt something inside her chest turn to ice. You would lie under oath. Margaret's chin came up. To protect my son, yes. The baby kicked, hard, like she was protesting, like she already knew the world she was being born into was corrupt and broken. Eleanor's hand moved to her belly, felt the life there, the innocent life that deserved better than all of this. Margaret moved to the door, paused, her hand on the handle. Outside through the window, Eleanor glimpsed 2 riders on horseback. Margaret's personal guards, hard-faced men positioned across from the sheriff's office. One carried a bow slung across his shoulder. Sentries, making sure they didn't run. Margaret looked back one final time. You have until dawn to reconsider. After that, her eyes flicked to the window, to her waiting men. After that, I can't control what happens. The threat was clear. Eleanor's hand moved protectively to her belly. Get out, she said quietly. Margaret didn't move. Eleanor, get out. The words came out louder, sharper, loud enough that the sheriff heard through the door. Margaret looked at Eleanor for one more moment. Something passed across her face. Regret, maybe? Or grief for a relationship that was dying in real time. Then she turned and walked out. Her footsteps echoed on the boardwalk, faded, disappeared. Eleanor stood very still. She felt like if she moved, she might shatter. might break into 1,000 pieces that could never be put back together. Gideon was beside her suddenly. She hadn't heard him move. His hand touched her elbow, gentle, uncertain. "Eleanor," he said, just her name, but the way he said it was different now, not angry, not bitter, something almost like compassion. She turned to him, looked up into his scarred face, into eyes that had seen their own share of betrayal and loss. "We leave in an hour," Gideon said. His voice was steady, certain. "Forget Helena. We go straight to Fort Benton, federal marshal there. Name's Cole Pritchard, served with me in the Army. He's honest. Fort Benton is 150 miles. Eleanor's voice sounded small, lost. "Then we better start now." He offered his hand. Eleanor looked at it, at the calluses and scars, at the strength there, at the only lifeline she had left. She took it. The window shattered. Glass exploded inward. Both of them dropped. An arrow embedded itself in the far wall, a piece of paper tied to the shaft. Gideon pulled the arrow free, unfolded the note. His face went hard. "Bring the evidence to Widow's Creek by dawn. Come alone, or we burn the town and everyone in it." The note was signed with initials. M.L. Margaret Langford. Eleanor stared at the paper, at her mother's handwriting, at the ultimatum that left no room for mercy. She had 48 hours to submit Thomas's evidence. She had maybe 2 weeks before the baby came. She had a mother who would burn a town to protect her son. And she had Gideon Thorne, a convicted killer who might be the only honest man left in Montana Territory. Outside, thunder rumbled. The first drops of rain began to fall. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolled, counting down the hours until dawn. Eleanor pressed her hand against her belly, felt the baby move, felt the future trying to be born into a world that didn't want it. "We're not going to Widow's Creek," she said. Her voice was steady now, certain. Gideon looked at her. "We're going to finish what Thomas started. We're going to expose every lie, every corrupt official, every stolen acre of land. And when we're done, my mother and her family will have nothing left but the truth they tried so hard to bury." She looked up at Gideon. "Are you with me?" Gideon was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled. It was a hard smile. The smile of a man who'd been waiting 8 years to settle accounts. "Thomas stole a lot from me, but he got one thing right." "What's that?" "He married a woman with more spine than sense. Let's go burn their world down." The rain came down in sheets by the time they left Redemption Springs. Eleanor sat in the back of a freight wagon hidden under canvas and burlap sacks that smelled of grain and horse feed. Gideon drove. The horse was old, but steady, borrowed from Sheriff Crenshaw, who decided that sometimes the law meant looking the other way while justice got done. The sheriff had given them supplies: dried meat, hardtack, a canteen of water, and another of whiskey for when the pain got bad. He'd looked at Eleanor's belly and shaken his head, but said nothing. Some things didn't need words. They'd left through the back streets, avoided the main road. Gideon knew these mountains, had spent 5 years trapping and hunting and living like a ghost before his arrest. The wilderness didn't care about warrants or accusations. It just was. Eleanor lay on her side among the grain sacks. Every bump sent pain shooting through her back. The baby was restless tonight, kicking, turning, like she knew something was wrong. Thunder rolled across the sky. Lightning turned the world white for split seconds. In those flashes, Eleanor could see Gideon's silhouette on the driver's bench. Solid, unmovable, a mountain of a man carved from harder stone than the peaks around them. She wondered what Thomas had seen in his younger brother. What had made him so afraid of Gideon that he'd hidden evidence of innocence? What guilt had driven him to let an innocent man rot in prison while he built a life on foundations of lies? The wagon lurched. Eleanor bit back a gasp. Pain flared across her abdomen. Not a contraction. Not yet. Just the baby protesting the rough travel. Gideon's voice carried back to her through the rain. "How are you holding up?" His words were clipped, efficient. A man conserving energy for the hard miles ahead. "I've been better," Eleanor said. Her voice sounded thin even to her own ears. The wagon slowed, stopped. Gideon climbed down, appeared at the back. Water streamed off his hat, his coat. He looked like something that had crawled out of a river. "We need to talk about what happens if the baby comes early." Eleanor pushed herself up to sitting. Her hands were shaking. From cold or fear, she couldn't tell anymore. The baby's not coming for another 2 weeks, at least. Gideon's eyes were dark in the stormlight, unreadable. "You don't know that. Stress can bring on labor. So can travel. So can fear. And you've got all three." Eleanor wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she was fine, that she could handle this, but the lie stuck in her throat. "What do you want me to do?" she asked instead. "Turn back, hide, wait for them to find me." Gideon was quiet for a long moment. Rain drummed on the canvas above them. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. "I want you to tell me the truth about that baby, about what happened. Because if we're going to trust each other, if we're going to survive this, I need to know what we're really fighting for." Eleanor felt something crack inside her chest. Some wall she'd built to keep the memories at bay, to keep the shame and rage and grief locked away where they couldn't touch her. She'd told the story once, to Thomas, to the doctor who'd examined her after, to no one else, not her mother, not her sisters, not the sheriff who'd asked gentle questions and written nothing down. Now she was going to tell Gideon Thorne, the brother of her dead husband, a man who had every reason to hate her family, to judge her, to turn away. But something in his eyes stopped her fear, something that looked almost like understanding, like he'd seen his own share of violence and knew what it cost. It was in April, she began. Her voice was barely audible over the rain. Thomas was in Fort Benton. 3-day trip. He was meeting with a federal land surveyor about discrepancies in the territorial maps. She paused, took a breath. Victor Langford came to the house. He'd been drinking. I could smell it on him from 10 feet away. He said he wanted to talk, said his father had sent him to discuss Thomas's investigation, to make sure there were no misunderstandings. Thunder crashed. Eleanor flinched but kept talking. I let him in. I was polite. I offered him coffee. I thought this was politics, thought he was there to negotiate or threaten, or whatever it is powerful men do when they want something. Her hands were fists now, nails cutting into palms. He put something in my coffee, I don't know what. Laudanum, maybe? Or something stronger. Everything went fuzzy. I tried to stand, tried to tell him to leave, but my legs wouldn't work. My voice wouldn't work. Gideon's face had gone very still, very hard, like granite weathering a storm. He said I was beautiful, said he'd always thought so, said it was a waste for Thomas to have me when he didn't appreciate what he had. Eleanor's voice cracked. I fought. I tried. But I couldn't move, couldn't scream, could only lie there while he... She couldn't finish, couldn't say the words. They stuck in her throat like broken glass. Gideon's hand reached out, touched hers, gentle. The calloused fingers closed around her fist, held on. You don't have to say it, I understand. Eleanor looked at their joined hands, at the strength there, at the first human contact she'd had since Thomas died that wasn't violent or threatening or demanding something she couldn't give. Thomas came home and found me, she continued. Her voice was steadier now, raw but steady. I told him what happened, who did it. He wanted to kill Victor, wanted to ride to the Capitol and put a bullet in him. But I stopped him. Why? Because Victor's father is the territorial governor, because we had no proof, because it would have been my word against his, and everyone knows what happens to women who accuse powerful men's sons of rape. She took a shaking breath. So Thomas did the only thing he could think of. He investigated deeper, dug into every business deal the governor had ever made, every land grant, every survey. He found the corruption, found proof that would destroy the Langford family completely. Gideon understood immediately. Leverage. He was building leverage so they couldn't touch you. Eleanor nodded. 2 weeks after the assault, I found out I was pregnant. The timing. The timing made it clear this baby wasn't Thomas's. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Thomas said it didn't matter, said the baby was innocent, said she was ours regardless of how she was conceived. He started planning how to protect both of us, how to use the evidence to force the governor to leave us alone. What went wrong? Eleanor's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Thomas sent a letter to the governor, said he had evidence of massive land fraud, said if anything happened to us, if Victor came near me again, the evidence would go straight to the federal authorities. He thought that would be enough, thought the threat would protect us, but it didn't. No, they killed him 3 days later, made it look like an accident, a fire. Everyone accepted it. Poor Thomas Wilhelm, such a tragedy. His young pregnant widow left all alone. Except you knew better, I knew. I found Thomas's notes, found copies of the evidence he'd gathered, found his plan to submit everything to the territorial court, found the appointment he'd made with Judge Langford for the day after he died. Eleanor looked up at Gideon. And I found your letter, the one that proved you were innocent, the one Thomas hid because he was ashamed, because he'd failed you the same way everyone else had failed you, because he was too proud to admit he was wrong. Gideon was quiet for a long time. His hand still held hers. Warm despite the cold rain, finally he spoke. Thomas and I, we were never close, not even as boys. Our mother favored him, smarter, better at books and law, and all the things that mattered in civilized society. I was the wild one, the one who couldn't sit still in church, who'd rather trap muskrats than read Latin. He paused. When our parents died, Thomas inherited everything, the house, the land, the money. I got $50 and a horse. He said it was what our father wanted, that I wasn't responsible enough for property, that I'd just drink it away or gamble it away or lose it to some scheme. Was he right? Eleanor asked quietly. Gideon smiled. It was a sad smile, the smile of a man looking back at a younger self. Probably. I was 23, angry, reckless. I took that $50 and headed west. Figured I'd make my fortune in the gold fields or die trying. What happened? I didn't die. Didn't make a fortune either. Just learned how to survive in country that killed softer men. Learned to track, to hunt, to read weather and water and the way animals moved. Got good at it. Good enough that the Army hired me as a scout during the conflicts with the Lakota. Eleanor heard something in his voice, something dark. That's where you got the scar, she said. Gideon's free hand moved to his face, traced the line from eyebrow to jaw. Cheyenne warrior, hand-to-hand fight during a raid on a supply column. He gave me this. I gave him a bullet. Neither of us won that day. He fell silent too. After the Army, I came back to Montana, found out Thomas had married Julia, the woman I'd loved since I was 16. Eleanor's breath caught. I didn't know. How could you? Thomas never mentioned me, never told Julia about his wild brother living in the mountains. When I showed up at the wedding, Julia looked at me like I was a ghost. What did you do? Nothing. What could I do? She'd made her choice. Thomas had made his offer. I was the one who'd left, who'd chased fool's gold instead of staying home and courting the girl next door. Gideon's voice went flat. Julia died a year later. Childbirth complications. The baby, too. I blamed Thomas, blamed his cheapness, his pride, his unwillingness to pay for proper medical care. I didn't know about the loan, about the debt he took on trying to save her. Eleanor squeezed his hand. Thomas carried that guilt until he died. He wrote about it in his journal, about how he failed Julia, failed you, how he couldn't bear to face you because he had no defense. They sat in silence. The rain eased slightly, became a steady patter instead of a deluge. Finally Gideon spoke. This baby, Grace, she's innocent in all this. Eleanor nodded. She didn't ask to be conceived through violence, didn't ask for a father who's a rapist and a mother who's running for her life. But she's coming into this world anyway, and she deserves better than what we got. Gideon looked at Eleanor, really looked at her, saw the strength under the exhaustion, the steel under the softness, the woman who'd spent every penny she owned to save a man who had every reason to hate her family. We're going to give her better, he said. His voice carried certainty. Promise. Whatever it takes, even if it costs us everything. Especially then. Eleanor felt tears finally spill over, felt the grief and fear and rage she'd been holding break through. Gideon pulled her close, awkward, uncertain, but there, solid, real. She cried into his shoulder while the rain washed the world clean around them. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were red but clear. Tell me about Fort Benton, about this marshal you trust. Gideon helped her settle back against the grain sacks, made sure she was as comfortable as possible given the circumstances. Cole Pritchard. We served together in the Dakota campaigns. He was a sergeant. I was a scout. He saved my life twice. Once from a Lakota arrow that would have taken my head off. Once from a court-martial when I punched a lieutenant who was stealing from dead soldiers. Eleanor managed a weak smile. Sounds like a good man. The best I've ever known. Honest to a fault. Won't take bribes. Won't look the other way. Which is why he's still just a marshal after 15 years instead of wearing a judge's robes. Will he help us? If he's alive and able, yes. If the evidence is solid, he'll move heaven and earth to see justice done. And if he's not alive, then we improvise. Gideon climbed back onto the driver's bench, took up the reins. The wagon started moving again, slower now, more careful. The road ahead was treacherous in the dark and rain. Eleanor lay back and tried to rest, tried not to think about the miles ahead, about Margaret's ultimatum, about Victor Langford walking free while she ran for her life. Tried not to think about the baby moving inside her, about what kind of world she was bringing her daughter into. Sleep came in fits and starts, dreams mixed with memories. Thomas burning, Victor's face above hers, Margaret's cold eyes, Gideon's scarred hands offering the only kindness she'd known in months. She woke to silence. The rain had stopped. The wagon wasn't moving. Pale dawn light filtered through gaps in the canvas. Eleanor sat up slowly. Everything hurt. Her back, her hips, her swollen feet. The baby was quiet now. Too quiet. Eleanor pressed her hand against her belly and felt movement. Relief flooded through her. She pushed aside the canvas and looked out. They were in a clearing surrounded by pine trees. The smell of wood smoke reached her. Gideon had built a small fire, was boiling coffee in a tin pot. "Morning," he said without turning around. "How's the pain? Manageable?" "Where are we?" "About 20 miles from Redemption Springs. We made good time, despite the storm. Should reach the Wolf Creek crossing by midday. Fort Benton by tomorrow night if we push hard." Eleanor climbed down from the wagon. Her legs nearly gave out. Gideon was there in an instant, catching her, supporting her weight. "Easy. You've been lying still too long. Blood needs to move." He helped her to a log near the fire, handed her a tin cup of coffee. It was bitter and strong and exactly what she needed. They sat in silence while the sun climbed higher. Birds started singing. Somewhere nearby a stream gurgled. The world felt almost peaceful, almost normal. Eleanor knew it wouldn't last. "Gideon," she said, "about what I told you last night, about Victor. You don't owe me explanations. I know. But I need to say this." He looked at her, waited. "I'm not ashamed of this baby. I know how she was made. I know what people will say. That I should have, that I could have. But she's mine. She's innocent. And I'll die before I let anyone hurt her the way I was hurt." Gideon's face softened. "No one's going to hurt her. I give you my word." "Why?" Eleanor asked. "Why do you care?" "You owe me nothing." "Oh, Thomas, less than nothing. Why risk your life for us?" Gideon stared into the fire. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, thoughtful. "Because I've spent 8 years hating my brother for things he did and didn't do. 8 years nursing grudges and building walls. And in all that time, the only thing I accomplished was making myself smaller, meaner, more alone." He looked at her. "Thomas is dead. Julia is dead. Our parents are dead. All the people I loved or hated or blamed. Gone. But you're here, And that baby's here, and maybe this is my chance to do something that actually matters, something that isn't just survival or revenge or nursing old wounds. Eleanor felt fresh tears building. You're a better man than you think you are. Gideon shook his head. I'm a man trying to be better. There's a difference. They finished their coffee in silence. Gideon kicked dirt over the fire, helped Eleanor back into the wagon. We need to move. Sun's up. People will be looking. Eleanor settled among the grain sacks. As Gideon climbed onto the driver's bench, she called out, Gideon, yeah, thank you for listening, for believing me, for... She couldn't finish. Gideon looked back at her. His scarred face was gentle in the morning light. For being family, he finished. Even when family failed us both. The wagon started moving. They traveled through country that grew wilder with each mile. The road became a track. The track became a suggestion. Trees closed in on both sides. Mountains loomed ahead, snow-capped and ancient. This was Gideon's territory, the wilderness where he'd spent years learning to be invisible, to survive, to become something other than the angry young man who'd left civilization behind. Around midday they reached Wolf Creek. The water was high from the rain, running fast and brown with mud. The crossing looked treacherous. Gideon stopped the wagon, studied the water. We'll have to ford here. No bridge for another 15 miles, and we don't have time. Is it safe? Eleanor asked. Safe enough if we're careful. That's not the same as safe. Gideon smiled grimly. Nothing about this is safe, but it's possible. And possible is all we've got. He urged the horse forward. The animal balked at the water. Gideon spoke to it, low, soothing. The horse stepped in. The current grabbed immediately, tried to push them downstream. The wagon tilted. Eleanor gripped the sides, felt water seeping through the floorboards. Gideon fought the reins, kept the horse pointed across. Slow, steady, fighting for every foot of forward progress. They were halfway across when Eleanor saw them. Riders, 4 of them, on the far bank, watching. Gideon saw them too. His shoulders tensed, but he kept the wagon moving, kept fighting the current. The horse found its footing on the far side, pulled them up onto the bank. Water streamed from the wagon wheels. The riders sat their horses 20 yards away. They were hard men, the kind who made their living in ways that didn't bear close examination. Bounty hunters, maybe, or hired guns. The leader spurred his horse forward, middle-aged, scarred, eyes like chips of flint. That's far enough, Gideon said. His hand moved to the rifle beside him on the bench. The leader smiled. It wasn't friendly. Easy, friend. We're not looking for trouble. Then, ride on. Can't do that. See, we got word there is a reward out for a pregnant woman, widow by the name of Wilhelm, wanted for questioning in relation to her husband's death. Eleanor's blood went cold. The leader's eyes moved to the back of the wagon. Now, I'm thinking maybe you got cargo that isn't just grain. Thinking maybe we should take a look. Gideon's voice went flat. Dangerous. Thinking's dangerous for men like you. Tend to hurt yourselves. One of the other riders laughed, drew his pistol. Big talk from one man against 4. Gideon didn't move, didn't even blink. 4 men on tired horses. 4 men who know if they shoot me, they'll never find where the woman went. Because she's not in this wagon. She's already 2 miles east with fresh horses and a 12-hour head start. The leader's eyes narrowed. You're bluffing. Maybe. Maybe not. You willing to bet your reward on it? Gideon's voice dropped. Or maybe you noticed the sun reflecting off rifle scopes in the trees. 3 positions, North Ridge, South Ridge, behind you. Federal marshals. Been tracking you since you left Redemption Springs. The leader's horse shifted. The man glanced around nervously. There's nobody in those trees. Then call my bluff. Start shooting. See what happens. Long silence. The leader calculating odds. Finally he spat. This ain't over. Sure it is. Because tomorrow the whole territory will know what the governor did, what Victor did. And anyone still hunting this woman will be hunting a federal witness. You want that kind of heat? The leader jerked his reins. His men followed. They rode away. Eleanor emerged from the wagon. There was nobody in those trees. Gideon smiled grimly. I know, but they didn't. Eleanor felt her legs shaking. the adrenaline leaving her system. She sank to the ground. How much further? Gideon helped her up. 10 miles, maybe 12. There's a place. An old trapping cabin. Built it myself 5 years ago. We can rest there, regroup, and then we find Cole Pritchard, and we finish this. They rode through the afternoon. The forest grew denser, wilder. This was country that had never known civilization, never would. Eleanor felt the contractions start around 4, not strong, not yet. Just twinges, warnings, her body preparing for what was coming. She didn't tell Gideon, didn't want him to worry, didn't want to stop. But he knew anyway, saw it in the way she shifted, the way her breathing changed, how bad he asked without turning around. Not bad? Not yet. How far apart? Maybe 20 minutes. Gideon's shoulders tensed. He urged the horse faster. The cabin appeared as the sun touched the western peaks, small, rough, built from logs that had weathered years of mountain storms, but solid, real, standing. Gideon helped Eleanor inside. The interior was Spartan. A stone fireplace, a rough table, a bed frame with no mattress. But there were supplies, canned goods, dried meat, blankets in a trunk that smelled of cedar. Someone had been here recently. Gideon saw the same thing Eleanor did. Fresh ashes in the fireplace, a tin cup on the table, boot prints in the dust. He drew his knife, moved to the back room, stopped. Eleanor heard his breath catch. What is it she called? Gideon came back. His face was unreadable. We're not alone. Fear spiked through Eleanor. Who? Before Gideon could answer, a voice came from the doorway behind them. Been wondering when you'd show up. Eleanor spun. Pain lanced through her back. She bit back a cry. A man stood in the doorway. Tall, gray-haired, wearing a marshal's badge that caught the failing light. Hello, Gideon, the man said. His voice was warm, familiar. You're looking rough. Gideon's shoulders relaxed, slightly. Cole, you're alive. Takes more than corrupt politicians to kill me, though they did try. Marshal Cole Pritchard stepped into the cabin. His eyes moved to Eleanor, softened with concern. Ma'am, you look like you need a doctor and a bed. I can't offer the first, but I can help with the second. Eleanor stared at him, at the badge, at the lines in his face that spoke of years fighting battles most people never knew about. You're Marshal Pritchard, but Gideon was convicted of killing Marshal Eugene Frost. Cole's face went hard. Eugene Frost was my partner. We were both investigating the governor's land fraud scheme. The governor's men murdered Frost and framed Gideon for it, made it look like a saloon brawl gone wrong. I knew Gideon was innocent because I was there the night Frost died. I saw who really killed him. Eleanor's voice shook. Then why didn't you testify? Why did you let Gideon go to prison? Because if I'd come forward, they would have killed me too, so I faked my own death. Different murder, different circumstances. Made it look like I was killed by outlaws during a stagecoach holdup. Gave me the freedom to investigate without the governor watching my every move. Gideon's voice was tight with barely controlled rage. While I rotted in prison for 8 months, Cole met his eyes. No excuses, no deflection. While I built the case that would free you and bring down everyone responsible. I know that doesn't make it right. I know you lost months of your life because of choices I made. I'm sorry, Gideon, truly. But if I'd acted sooner, we'd both be dead and Eleanor would have no one to help her now. Eleanor felt the room spin, tried to process. You know about Thomas, she said, about what he found. Cole nodded. Thomas and I were working together. He gathered evidence from the civilian side. I gathered it from the federal law enforcement side. Between us, we had enough to bring down everyone from the governor to half the territorial legislature. Then why didn't you? Cole's voice went quiet. Because they killed Thomas before we could move. Burned the evidence, or so they thought. I've been trying to find you for 3 weeks, trying to get to you before they did. Eleanor's legs gave out. Gideon caught her, lowered her to a chair. I need to lie down, she said. Her voice was tight. The contractions. They're getting closer. How close? Cole asked quietly. 10 minutes, maybe less. Cole and Gideon exchanged looks. "She's not riding anywhere tomorrow," Cole said. "The baby's coming tonight." The contractions came harder now, faster. Eleanor gripped the blankets, tried to breathe through the pain like the midwife had taught her months ago in another lifetime. But this wasn't a clean bedroom in Helena with a doctor waiting downstairs. This was a trapper's cabin in the middle of nowhere, with a mountain man who'd delivered animals and a federal marshal who'd seen men die but never seen one born. Another contraction hit. Eleanor cried out, couldn't help it. The pain was beyond anything she'd imagined, beyond anything her body was prepared for. "I can't," she gasped. "I can't do this, not here, not like this." Gideon moved to her side, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he helped her settle against the rough pillows he'd arranged. "Yes, you can." His voice was calm, certain. "You're the strongest woman I know. You've survived assassination attempts and bounty hunters and your mother's betrayal. You can survive this. This is different." Eleanor's voice broke. "This is my baby. What if something goes wrong? What if she dies because I brought her into the world in a cabin instead of a hospital? Then we'll deal with it together." "But she's not going to die. You're not going to die. I won't let that happen." Cole appeared with boiled water and clean cloths. Set them on the table. His face was carefully neutral, but Eleanor saw the concern in his eyes. "How long?" Cole asked quietly. "Hours yet," Gideon said. "First babies take time. Could be dawn, could be later." "I'll keep watch," Cole said. He moved to the window, gave them privacy but stayed close enough to help if needed. Eleanor felt another contraction building, gritted her teeth. Gideon's hand found hers. She squeezed, hard enough that she felt bones shift. He didn't flinch. "That's it. Breathe through it. Don't fight the pain. Let it do its work." "Easy for you to say," Eleanor managed. "I know." Gideon's scarred face softened. "I'm sorry. I wish I could take this from you." The contraction passed. Eleanor lay back, exhausted already and hours still to go. "Tell me about Julia," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Tell me what happened when she died." Gideon went very still. Eleanor felt him start to pull away. She held his hand tighter. "Please, I need to know I'm not alone in this. Need to know someone else has been afraid and survived it." Gideon was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice rough with old grief. "She went into labor at home. Thomas sent for the doctor, but a storm came in. Roads washed out. By the time the doctor arrived, it was too late. The baby was breech. Julia had been pushing for hours. She was exhausted, bleeding." He paused. "I wasn't there. I was in the mountains. Didn't even know she was pregnant. By the time Thomas got word to me 3 days later, they were both already buried." Eleanor's heart broke for him, for the loss he'd carried alone all these years. "I'm sorry, I didn't know. How could you?" Thomas never talked about it, never admitted he'd failed her, that his pride and cheapness cost both their lives. Another contraction, stronger than before. Eleanor arched against the pain. Gideon moved into position, his hands on her belly, feeling. "Baby's still high," he said. "You've got a ways to go yet." The hours crawled past. Contractions came in waves, each one stronger than the last, each one breaking Eleanor down a little more. Gideon stayed beside her, talking quietly, telling stories from his years in the mountains, from the army campaigns, anything to distract her from the pain. Cole kept watch, occasionally stepping outside to check the perimeter, coming back to report all clear. The night stayed quiet. No bounty hunters, no governor's men, just the three of them and the baby trying to be born. Around midnight, Eleanor felt something change, a pressure low in her pelvis, an urge to push that was overwhelming. "Gideon," she gasped, "something's different." He examined her again. His face went serious. "Baby's coming. I need you to listen to me very carefully. On the next contraction, I need you to push. But not yet. Wait for it." The contraction built. Eleanor felt her body taking over, felt the primitive urge to bear down. Now Gideon said, "Push, hard as you can." Eleanor pushed, felt something shift, Felt the baby move. Good. That's good. Rest now. Wait for the next one. 3 more contractions, 3 more pushes. Eleanor's strength was fading. She could feel herself giving up, could feel the darkness at the edges of her vision. I can't. I'm too tired. I can't do this anymore. Gideon's hand gripped hers. His voice cut through the fog. Look at me. Eleanor, look at me. She opened her eyes, met his gaze. Dark eyes that had seen death and dealt death and now were fighting for life. You can do this. One more push. That's all I need. One more and we'll have her. I can't. Yes, you can. You're not just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for her, for Grace, for the baby who deserves to live, who deserves to grow up strong and free. You're fighting for Thomas, for everyone who died trying to bring justice to this territory. One more push. Give me one more. The contraction came. Eleanor bore down with everything she had left, felt something tear, felt pain sharper than anything before. Then, suddenly, release. She collapsed back, heard herself sobbing, heard Gideon moving, working. Then, silence, terrifying silence. Eleanor's heart stopped. No, no, please, no. Cole moved to the bedside, his face pale. Gideon. His voice was urgent. Gideon, what's wrong? Gideon didn't answer. His hands moved quickly, clearing the baby's mouth, rubbing her back, stimulating her to breathe. Please, Eleanor whispered, please don't take her from me. More silence, seconds that felt like hours. Then, a cry, small, angry, the most beautiful sound Eleanor had ever heard. She's here, Gideon said. His voice was shaking. She's here, and she's perfect. He worked quickly, tying off the cord, cutting it with his knife that he'd sterilized in the fire, wrapping the baby in the cleanest blanket Cole had prepared. Then he brought her to Eleanor. Their eyes met. Gideon's face was wet with tears. Eleanor had never seen him cry, not when he talked about Julia, not when he learned Thomas had betrayed him. But now tears streamed down his scarred face. He placed the baby on Eleanor's chest. Hello, Grace, Eleanor whispered. Welcome to the world. The baby's eyes opened, dark, unfocused, but searching, looking for her mother. Eleanor felt something fundamental shift inside her, some change that couldn't be undone. This wasn't just a baby conceived in violence. This was her daughter, her child, innocent and perfect and deserving of every good thing. She's beautiful, Cole said quietly. He'd moved closer, his own eyes suspiciously bright. Eleanor looked up at Gideon, at this man who'd delivered her daughter with hands more gentle than any doctor, who'd stayed calm when she panicked, who'd believed in her when she'd given up on herself. Thank you. The words weren't enough, could never be enough. But they were all she had. Thank you for saving her, for saving both of us. Gideon shook his head, seemed unable to speak. He reached out, touched Grace's tiny hand with one calloused finger. The baby's fingers curled around it, held tight. Something broke in Gideon's face. He bent forward, shoulders shaking, years of grief and rage and loss finally breaking through. Eleanor's free hand found his shoulder, held him while he cried, while he mourned Julia and the baby he'd never met, while he let go of the bitterness that had poisoned 8 years of his life. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were clear, lighter somehow, like a weight had lifted. Do you want to hold her? Eleanor asked softly. Gideon hesitated, looked at his rough hands, hands that had killed, that had fought and bled and destroyed. I don't want to hurt her. You won't. Eleanor's voice was certain. You're the gentlest person I know. When it matters, when it counts, you're gentle, slowly, carefully. Gideon took Grace from Eleanor's arms, cradled the infant against his chest. His large hands made the baby look impossibly small, impossibly fragile. Hello, little one, he murmured. His voice was rough, awed. I'm your Uncle Gideon, and I promise nothing bad will ever happen to you. As long as I'm alive, you'll be safe, you'll be loved, you'll be protected. The baby made a small sound, not quite a cry, more like a coo, like she recognized his voice, trusted him already. Gideon's face crumbled again. He bent his head, pressed his forehead gently to the baby's. "I failed Julia," he whispered. "Failed her and her baby. But I won't fail you. Won't fail either of you. That's my promise. That's my vow." Cole turned away, wiped his eyes, moved back to the window, giving them this moment, this sacred space where a family was being born from ashes. Eleanor watched Gideon with grace, watched this hard mountain man transform into something softer, something better. Watched him discover that strength wasn't just about surviving, it was about protecting what mattered. "You need to rest," Gideon said finally, his voice steadier now. "Both of you need sleep." He placed Grace carefully back in Eleanor's arms, helped arrange the blankets, made sure they were both comfortable. "Cole and I will take turns keeping watch. You sleep. We'll make sure you're safe." Eleanor wanted to stay awake, wanted to watch Grace breathe, wanted to memorize every tiny feature, but exhaustion was pulling her under. Months of fear and running and fighting, hours of labor, all of it catching up. Her eyes drifted closed. The last thing she saw was Gideon settling into the chair by the fire, his rifle across his lap, his eyes on the door, standing guard over the family he'd chosen. Outside, the night pressed close. Somewhere in the darkness, men were still hunting them, still wanted them dead. But inside the cabin, warmth and light held back the shadows. A baby slept peacefully in her mother's arms. A mountain man kept watch over the only family he had left. A federal marshal stood guard at the window, and, for the first time in months, Eleanor felt safe. Tomorrow they would ride to Widow's Creek. Tomorrow she would face the governor and testify. Tomorrow the reckoning would come. But tonight was for miracles, for new life, for the quiet satisfaction of survival. Tonight was for family. Grace stirred, made a small sound. Eleanor's arms tightened instinctively around her daughter. Gideon glanced over, met Eleanor's eyes across the dim cabin. Something passed between them. Understanding, gratitude, the beginning of something that might someday be more than survival. "Sleep," he said softly. "We've got you, both of you." And Eleanor believed him. She let her eyes close, let exhaustion take her, trusting this man who'd been a stranger a week ago, who was family now, who'd delivered her daughter with hands scarred from violence but capable of infinite tenderness. The fire crackled. The wind whispered through the pines. A baby breathed softly, and the night slowly gave way to dawn. Cole moved to the door, scanned the forest as morning light filtered through the trees. "Then we need to move fast, because I wasn't the only one tracking you, and the men on your trail won't stop just because you made it this far." He looked at Gideon. "How many did you see at Wolf Creek?" "4. Bounty hunters. I scared them off, but they'll be back with reinforcements." Cole nodded. "Then we've got maybe until midnight. After that, this place becomes a killing box." "What do you suggest?" Gideon asked. Cole pulled a map from his coat. "Spread it on the table. There's a territorial judge in Helena named Samuel Cross, one of the few honest ones left. If we can get Eleanor to his courthouse, get her testimony on record, along with the evidence, we can force a federal investigation." "Helena is 80 miles, Eleanor said from the bed. Her voice was tired but determined. "You won't have to," Cole interrupted. "Judge Cross is riding circuit. He'll be at Widow's Creek tomorrow, hearing land dispute cases." Eleanor's blood went cold. "Widow's Creek, that's where Margaret wants me to bring the evidence." Cole looked grim. "Then that's where we make our stand. But on our terms, not theirs." He looked at Eleanor. "Can you ride tomorrow, even with the baby?" Eleanor looked down at Grace sleeping in her arms, at the tiny, perfect face, at the life she'd fought so hard to protect. "Yes," she said. Her voice was steady despite the fear. "Whatever it takes." Cole smiled. It was a hard smile. The smile of a man who'd spent his life fighting corrupt power and learned to enjoy the battle. "Then let's give the governor and his family a trial they'll never forget." Outside, the sun climbed higher. Somewhere in the distance, men were gathering, planning, preparing to kill. But inside the cabin, 3 people prepared to fight back, prepared to bring justice to a place where justice had been bought and sold for too long. Eleanor closed her eyes, felt Gideon's presence like a shield, felt Cole's determination like armor, felt Grace's heartbeat against her chest like hope. Tomorrow would bring fire and blood and a reckoning that had been building for months. Tomorrow she would face her mother, her rapist, the corrupt system that had stolen everything from her. Tomorrow she would fight for the daughter who deserved better than the violence that created her. Tonight she rested, gathered her strength, and prayed that when the sun rose she would still be alive to see justice done. The darkness pressed close, but in the cabin a fire burned, small, steady, refusing to go out, just like hope. Dawn came cold and clear to the mountains. Eleanor woke to soreness, deep, radiating, the kind that came after bringing a life into the world. Her body felt like it had been through battle. In a way it had. She pressed her hand against her belly, soft now where it had been hard, empty where Grace had lived for 9 months. The baby slept in a makeshift cradle Gideon had fashioned from a wooden crate and blankets. Eleanor pushed herself upright. Everything protested. Her back, her hips, her torn and aching body, but she stood, walked to the cradle, looked down at her daughter. Grace was perfect. Tiny fists curled against her chest, dark hair wisping across her forehead, breathing soft and steady. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. This was what Thomas had died for, what she'd been running for, this innocent life that deserved a chance. Gideon was already awake. She could hear him outside the cabin talking low with Cole, planning, preparing, doing whatever men did when they were about to walk into certain danger. Eleanor lifted Grace carefully. The baby stirred but didn't wake. Eleanor held her close, breathed in that new baby smell, memorized the weight, the warmth. Cole appeared in the doorway. His face was lined with concern. "How are you feeling, ma'am?" Eleanor almost laughed. The question was absurd given the circumstances. "I've been better. How long until we leave?" "Hour, maybe less. Gideon's saddling the horses now. We'll ride slow, stop often, get you there as safely as possible." "Will it be safe?" "At all." Cole's silence was answer enough. Eleanor turned to face him fully. "Tell me the truth, Marshal. What are our odds?" Cole considered. When he spoke, his voice was honest, respectful. "Your mother will have men waiting. So will the governor. They know Judge Cross will be there. Know this is your last chance to submit evidence before the statute expires. They'll want to stop you any way they can. So our odds are poor. Our odds of getting you to that courthouse alive, maybe 1 in 3. Our odds of winning the case, if we do, much better. I've seen the evidence Thomas gathered. It's solid. Damning. Judge Cross is honest. He'll rule correctly if we survive long enough to present it." "Yes, ma'am, if we survive." Grace woke, made a small sound. Eleanor rocked her gently. The baby's eyes opened, unfocused but searching. "Then we better make sure we survive," Eleanor said. Her voice was steady now, certain. Gideon entered carrying saddlebags. His eyes went immediately to Eleanor, saw her standing, saw the determination in her face. "You should still be resting. I'll rest when they're all in prison." Gideon smiled despite the gravity. It was a small smile, sad, proud, stubborn, just like Thomas said. He said that, in his letters, the ones he never sent. He wrote about how you argued with him about everything, about politics and law and proper behavior, how you made him think harder, be better, how marrying you was the smartest thing he ever did. Tears pricked Eleanor's eyes. She blinked them back. "I wish I could have saved him. You're saving what he cared about most, his work, his principles, his family." Gideon's hand moved to Grace's head, gentle, uncertain. "This baby. She's Thomas's daughter in every way that matters, and she's ours now. That's all that counts." Eleanor covered his hand with hers. "Thank you for everything, for believing me, for helping me, for delivering her, for being the brother Thomas should have been." Gideon finished. "I'm trying. Still figuring out how." The moment stretched. Fragile. Real. Cole cleared his throat. "Hate to interrupt, But we need to move. Sun's up. People are stirring. The longer we wait, the more likely someone spots us. They gathered the last supplies. Eleanor changed into riding clothes, heavy skirt, wool coat, boots that barely fit over her still swollen feet. She looked at herself in the small, cracked mirror. Looked like a woman who'd given birth less than 12 hours ago. Looked exhausted, determined, ready. Outside, 3 horses waited. Gideon had fashioned a sling for Grace. Eleanor wore it across her chest. The baby nestled close, warm, protected. Mounting was agony. Every muscle screamed. But Eleanor gritted her teeth, found her balance, held Grace with one arm and the reins with the other. Gideon mounted beside her. Cole took point. They rode out as the sun cleared the peaks. The journey to Widow's Creek would normally take 4 hours on horseback. With Eleanor's condition and the baby, they were looking at 6, maybe more if they had to stop. They had 7 hours before Judge Cross's court session began. The mathematics of desperation. They followed game trails through dense forest. Cole navigated by instinct and memory. This was country he'd patrolled for years. He knew every creek, every ridge, every place where a man could hide or a horse could stumble. Eleanor focused on breathing, on staying in the saddle, on keeping Grace safe and warm against her chest. The baby slept mostly, woke occasionally to nurse. Eleanor would stop, dismount with Gideon's help, feed her daughter in the shelter of trees while Cole kept watch, then mount again, keep riding, keep moving toward the reckoning. Around mid-morning they stopped to rest the horses. Eleanor slid from her saddle carefully. Her body protested every movement, but she stayed upright. How much further, she asked. 2 hours, maybe 3. Cole's taking us the long way, avoiding the main roads, because they'll be watching the main roads, yes. Eleanor looked down at Grace. The baby's eyes were open now, dark, alert, looking up at her mother with complete trust. "What happens if I don't make it?" Eleanor said quietly. "If something happens to me, promise me you'll take care of her, raise her like she's yours. Nothing's going to happen to you. Promise me, Gideon." Gideon's jaw worked. Finally he nodded. "I promise, but you're going to make it. You're too stubborn to die now." Eleanor laughed. It came out broken, but real. "I hope you're right." They rode on. The forest began to thin. They were getting close to more populated areas, to farms and small homesteads, to civilization and all its dangers. Cole raised a hand. They stopped. Eleanor saw them then, riders, 6 of them, blocking the trail ahead, not bounty hunters this time. These men wore dusters, carried repeating rifles, sat their horses with military precision, governor's men. The leader spurred forward. Eleanor recognized him even at a distance. Captain James Voss, head of the territorial militia, the governor's personal enforcer, a hard man who'd built his reputation on violence and loyalty. "Well, well," Voss called out. His voice carried across the clearing. "The widow Wilhelm, the marshal who won't stay dead, and Gideon Thorne, the Stillwater killer." His smile was cold. "Got quite the collection of outlaws here." "We're not outlaws," Cole said. His voice was steady, official. "We're citizens traveling to attend a legal proceeding." "That's so." "What kind of proceeding?" "Land fraud case, territorial court, Judge Cross presiding." Voss's smile widened. "Shame you won't make it." He raised his hand. His men raised their rifles. Eleanor's heart hammered. She held Grace tighter, felt Gideon and Cole calculating odds, distances, possibilities, none of them good. Before anyone could move, another voice cut through the tension. "Lower your weapons, Captain." Eleanor's blood froze. A carriage appeared from the trees behind Voss's men. Black, expensive, drawn by matched horses. The door opened. Margaret Langford stepped out. Eleanor's mother looked every inch the governor's wife. Elegant, composed, in control despite the wilderness setting. Mother Eleanor breathed. Margaret walked forward, her eyes locked on Eleanor, seeing her daughter, the baby in her arms, all of it visible in her face. "Eleanor." Margaret's voice was soft, desperate. "Please, end this. Come home. We can protect you. Protect the baby. You don't have to do this." Eleanor felt Grace stir against her chest, felt the tiny heartbeat, the proof of survival. "Protect me. Like you protected me from Victor." Margaret flinched. That was a mistake. A terrible mistake. But Victor is getting help. He's in treatment. He'll never hurt anyone again. He's not in treatment. Eleanor's voice was hard. He's free, walking around the Capitol like he did nothing wrong, while I ran for my life. While I gave birth in a cabin because your family wants me dead, because you're threatening to destroy everything we built. Your family, not mine. I stopped being your family the moment you chose your rapist son over your daughter. Margaret's composure cracked. Tears spilled over. I raised you, loved you, gave you everything except justice. Silence. Heavy. Broken only by horses shifting, wind through trees. Margaret stood by her carriage, watching. Eleanor could see the war happening behind her mother's eyes. Duty versus love. Power versus truth. The woman she'd been versus the woman she might still become. Victor is inside that courthouse, one of Voss's men reported. Drunk, making a scene. Margaret's jaw tightened. Of course he is. Because he's never faced consequences. Because I've protected him from every mistake, every crime, until he became a monster who thinks he can do anything. She looked at Eleanor. Really looked at her. At the daughter she'd raised, the woman she'd failed. When Eleanor was 7, Margaret said quietly, almost to herself, "William told me the truth, that she was his daughter. From the affair. He said we could keep her or send her to an orphanage." She paused. "I chose to keep her, to raise her, not out of duty, out of love, because she was a child, innocent, deserving of a home." One of Voss's men shifted uncomfortably. "But I failed her," Margaret continued. "Failed to protect her from my son, from my husband, from the corruption I helped build by staying silent," Ma'am Voss said. "The governor wants us to—" "I don't care what the governor wants." Margaret's voice cut like steel. "I've spent 30 years caring what the governor wants, what Victor needs, what society expects, and all it's given me is a rapist son and a corrupt husband and a daughter who hates me." She looked at Eleanor. "I can't undo what's been done, can't take back the choices I made. But I can make one right choice, even if it costs me everything." She turned to Voss. "Stand down, Captain." "Ma'am," I said, "stand down." "Let them pass." Voss's jaw tightened. "The governor won't like this. The governor isn't here. I am, and I'm telling you to lower your weapons and let my daughter pass." "But, ma'am, the evidence." "Damn the evidence." Margaret's voice rose, sharp, commanding. The voice of a woman who'd spent 30 years managing powerful men. "My daughter just gave birth. She's holding my grandchild, Victor's child. Whether we like how she was conceived or not. And I will not have her blood on my hands. I will not have that baby harmed because of choices I made." She turned back to Eleanor. "Go, get to the courthouse. Have your voice heard. Submit your evidence. Testify against my husband, against Victor, against everyone." Tears streamed down her face, "But know this, when it's over, when the trials are done and the sentences are passed, I won't visit, won't write, won't try to be part of your life, because I don't deserve to be. I chose wrong too many times." Eleanor felt her own tears fall. "I know," she whispered, "and I forgive you, not for what you chose, but for being human, for being broken like the rest of us." Margaret nodded, stepped back. Voss and his men parted, created a path. Cole urged his horse forward. Gideon stayed close to Eleanor. They rode through the line of armed men. Every step felt like walking through fire. Eleanor looked back once, saw Margaret standing alone by her carriage, small, defeated, a woman who'd lost everything that mattered while holding on to everything that didn't. Then they were past. Into the trees, away. They rode hard for the next hour, put distance between themselves and the governor's men. Eleanor held Grace close, protected her from the jostling, from the cold wind. Cole kept checking over his shoulder, waiting for pursuit. But none came. Margaret had given them passage, at the cost of her own soul. Widow's Creek appeared ahead, a small settlement built around a crossroads, maybe 200 people. a general store, a church, a courthouse that doubled as a schoolhouse when court wasn't in session. The courthouse was already busy. Farmers and ranchers gathered on the steps, lawyers in dusty suits, witnesses waiting to testify in land disputes. Judge Samuel Cross's circuit court was in session. They dismounted in front of the building. Eleanor's legs were shaking, but she stayed upright. Grace was awake now, looking around with wide, dark eyes. Gideon offered his arm. Eleanor took it. Together they climbed the steps. People stared, whispered. A woman who'd just given birth, a baby less than a day old, a federal marshal who was supposed to be dead. The scandal would feed gossip for months. Eleanor didn't care. Inside the courthouse smelled of wood polish and old paper. Judge Cross sat at a raised bench, mid-60s, gray beard, sharp eyes that missed nothing. He looked up as they entered. His gavel stopped mid-strike. Marshal Pritchard, I heard you were dead. Reports were exaggerated, Your Honor. I need to request an emergency hearing. This woman has evidence of territorial land fraud. Evidence that expires today if not submitted to this court. Judge Cross's eyes moved to Eleanor, to the baby in her arms. Understanding dawned. Young lady, you look like you need a doctor, not a courthouse. I need justice, Your Honor. Eleanor's voice was strong despite the exhaustion. For my husband, for all the homesteaders who lost their land, for my daughter who deserves to be born into a world where law means something. The judge was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood. Court is recessed. Everyone out except the principals. Someone find Dr. Morrison. The courtroom emptied. Lawyers protested, were ignored. Within minutes, it was just Eleanor, Gideon Cole, Judge Cross, and a clerk. The judge came down from his bench. Show me what you have. Cole produced documents from his saddlebags, surveys, land grants, financial records, witness statements, Thomas's meticulous documentation of corruption spanning 5 years. The judge read in silence. His face grew darker with each page. This is extensive, damning, if even half of this is true. It's all true, Eleanor said. My husband died collecting it. Marshal Pritchard risked his life protecting it, and I've spent 3 months running for my life because of it. Grace stirred in her arms, made a small sound. Eleanor rocked her gently. The judge looked up. You'll testify to all of this, under oath. Yes, Your Honor. And you understand the consequences. The people named in these documents, they won't go quietly. I understand. But my daughter deserves better than a world where powerful men can rape and steal and murder without consequence. Judge Cross nodded slowly. Then we'll proceed. But first, you need medical attention, and that baby needs to be checked. Dr. Morrison arrived, older, weathered, kind eyes behind wire spectacles. He examined Eleanor briefly, confirmed she was stable, checked Grace, declared the baby healthy despite her dramatic entrance into the world. Then he stepped back. She's strong, he said to Eleanor. Your daughter, she's a fighter, just like her mother. Eleanor felt tears building again, pushed them down. She needed to be strong a little longer. Judge Cross called the court back to order. The room filled. Word had spread. People wanted to see this, wanted to witness history. Eleanor stood before the bench, Grace in her arms. The baby slept peacefully, unaware of the battle being fought for her future. Your Honor, Eleanor began. Her voice was steady, strong. My name is Eleanor Margaret Wilhelm, and I'm here to tell you how corruption murdered my husband and tried to murder me. The courtroom was silent, every eye on her. She testified for 2 hours, detailed, precise, with Grace sleeping against her shoulder, a reminder of what was at stake. The baby stirred occasionally. Eleanor paused to adjust her, to let her nurse briefly when she fussed. Judge Cross waited patiently. Understanding that this testimony was worth waiting for, Eleanor detailed the assault, the investigation, Thomas's death, the evidence he'd gathered, the corruption that reached the highest levels of territorial government. When she finished, she felt empty, drained, but also lighter. The truth was out, recorded, witnessed. Nothing could bury it now. Cole testified next about faking his death, about the murder of Marshall Frost, about the governor's involvement in land fraud and murder. Gideon testified about his wrongful conviction, about Thomas hiding evidence of his innocence, about months stolen from his life. Outside, more voices, shouting, confusion. Cole went to the window, looked out. His face went hard. The governor's here, with 20 armed men. They're surrounding the courthouse. Judge Cross's jaw set. Then we have a siege. Marshal, bar the doors. No one in or out until this proceeding is complete. Gideon moved to help Cole. They barricaded the entrance, moved furniture, prepared for battle. Eleanor held Grace closer. The baby woke, looked up at her mother with those dark, trusting eyes. "It's going to be okay," Eleanor whispered. "I promise. Whatever happens, you're going to be okay." Outside, the governor's voice carried through the walls. "Eleanor Wilhelm, you have 1 hour to surrender yourself and destroy all evidence. After that, we come in." Judge Cross stood. "This court does not negotiate with criminals. These proceedings will continue." He looked at Eleanor. "Are you prepared for what comes next?" Eleanor looked at Grace, at Gideon, at Cole, at the judge who was risking his life for justice. "Yes," she said, "whatever it takes." The siege began at noon. Governor William Langford stood outside the courthouse with his private army, not militia, not law enforcement, hired guns who owed allegiance to money, not justice. Inside, Judge Cross continued the hearing, called witnesses, examined evidence, conducted business as if armed men weren't surrounding the building. Eleanor sat with Grace in her arms. The baby nursed peacefully, unaware that her future was being decided in real time. Time crawled. An hour passed, then 2. The governor's deadline came and went. Nothing happened. Cole moved to the window, looked out. His expression shifted. Federal troops, 2 companies from Fort Shaw. They're surrounding the governor's men. Relief flooded through Eleanor. She'd sent word to Fort Shaw weeks ago, requested federal intervention, hadn't known if the message got through. But it had. The governor stood in the middle of the square, alone now, his men behind him but not beside him, federal troops in front of him. One of his riders spoke up, young, uncertain. "Sir, federal troops have surrounded us. We're outgunned. We should surrender." The governor's shoulders sagged. "Of course we are," Cole Pritchard, always 3 steps ahead. He looked up at the courthouse. At the window where Eleanor stood with Grace. "When Margaret told me the truth about you, when you were 7 years old, I had a choice, claim you or hide you. I chose hiding, chose power over family." His voice was hollow now, defeated. "And I've been making that choice every day for 21 years, choosing position over people, legacy over love, until everything I built became a prison I couldn't escape." Eleanor's hand gripped the window frame. The governor continued, "My wife just chose you over me. My son is in that courthouse, drunk, destroying himself. Federal troops have surrounded me. My political allies are already abandoning me. The newspapers will have this story by tomorrow." He laughed bitterly. "I could fight, could die here, but then would I become a murderer instead of just a corrupt politician? I destroy the last shred of dignity I might salvage." He looked at his men. "Any of you who want to run now. I'm surrendering, facing trial, taking whatever sentence they give me. Because for once in my miserable life, I'm going to take responsibility for what I've done." He turned to the courthouse. "Eleanor, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm just asking that you tell Grace the truth about me, all of it, the good and the bad, so she can learn from my mistakes." Then he turned to Captain Voss. "Lower your weapons. We're surrendering to the federal marshals." Voss hesitated, looked at his men. They were already lowering their rifles, already accepting the inevitable. The captain nodded, dismounted, placed his weapons on the ground. One by one, the governor's men followed. Federal troops moved in, began making arrests, calm, professional. The machinery of justice grinding forward. Inside the courthouse, someone started clapping, then another, then the whole room erupted in applause. Eleanor sank into a chair, Grace in her arms, tears streaming down her face. It was over. Not perfectly, not without cost. Thomas was still dead. Margaret was lost. The scars would never fully heal. But justice had been served. Spring came to Montana with wildflowers and warm winds. Eleanor stood on the porch of a small house outside Helena, not the mansion she'd shared with Thomas, not the life she'd planned, but a good life, honest, clean. The house was simple. 3 rooms, a garden, a barn for the horse Gideon had bought. A place to start over. Inside, Grace played on a blanket. 6 months old, healthy, happy, already trying to crawl. Her dark eyes were alert, curious, taking in the world with wonder. Eleanor watched her daughter, felt pride and love and fierce protectiveness. Grace would grow up knowing the truth, about how she was conceived, about her biological father in prison, about Thomas who'd claimed her, about Gideon who delivered her and stayed. But she would grow up loved, protected, free. Gideon came up the path from town. He'd been meeting with a lawyer, finalizing the settlement. The territorial government had paid restitution to Eleanor, to the Lakota tribe, to every homesteader who'd lost land to fraud. Not enough money to make up for what was stolen, but enough to start over, to rebuild. "How did it go?" Eleanor asked. "Done, signed. The land grant for the homestead is in your name, legally, properly." He sat beside her on the porch steps. "Cole sends his regards. He's being promoted, Chief Federal Marshal for Montana Territory. They want him to clean house, root out the last of the corruption. Will he? If anyone can, it's Cole." They sat in comfortable silence, watched the sun settle toward the mountains. Finally, Eleanor spoke. "I've been thinking. Dangerous occupation." Eleanor smiled. "About us. About what we are. What we could be." Gideon looked at her, waiting. "You could leave. You're free now. Name cleared. You could go anywhere, do anything. I could. But you're staying." Gideon's hand found hers. "Where would I go? What would I do, Trap? Beaver. Live alone in the mountains. Pretend I don't have family here." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "You want to stay. With us. If you'll have me. I know it's complicated. I know people will talk, but—" He stopped, looked at their joined hands. "But I've spent 8 years alone. 8 years angry. And in the past 7 months with you and Grace, I've been happier than I've been since Julia died. Maybe happier than I ever was." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "I want you to stay. Not as Thomas's brother, not as Grace's uncle. As yourself. As the man who saved my life, who delivered my daughter, who chose us when he could have walked away." Gideon cupped her face, gentle, his scarred hands trembling. "I'm not good with words, not like Thomas was. Then don't use words." He kissed her, soft, careful, like she might break. Eleanor kissed back, harder, showing him she wouldn't. When they pulled apart, Grace was fussing inside. Gideon stood, went to get her, came back with the baby in his arms. "Hello, little one. Did we wake you?" Grace grabbed his beard, pulled. Gideon laughed. Eleanor watched them. Her daughter, her, whatever he was becoming. Family. Chosen. Built from ashes. Stronger for being earned. The sun touched the mountains, painted the sky gold and crimson. In the distance, a train whistle blew, the Northern Pacific, bringing settlers, bringing change, bringing the future. Eleanor stood, took Grace, held her daughter close. "Look," she whispered. "See how beautiful the world is. See how much there is to fight for." Grace's hand reached for the sunset, grasping at light. Eleanor smiled. "You're going to be amazing. Strong like your father Thomas, brave like your uncle Gideon, and stubborn like your mother." She looked at Gideon and loved, always loved. Gideon's arm came around her shoulders, pulled her close. They stood together on the porch. 3 people who'd survived fire and corruption and violence. 3 people who'd chosen each other when the world tried to tear them apart. Inside the house, a lamp flickered to life, warm, welcoming. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The trials were over, but the healing would take years. Montana territory was changing, slowly, painfully, but changing. And Eleanor would be part of that change, would raise her daughter to demand better, to fight harder, to never accept corruption as inevitable. But tonight was for family, for rest, for the quiet satisfaction of knowing they'd won, not perfectly, not without cost. Thomas was still dead, Margaret was lost. The scars would never fully heal. But justice had been served, truth had prevailed, and Grace would grow up in a world slightly better than the one her mother had known. That was worth everything. Eleanor looked at Gideon, at the man who'd been a stranger 7 months ago, who was family now, who might be something more someday soon, ready to go inside. Gideon nodded. They walked through the door together, into the warm lamplight, into the future they were building one day at a time. Behind them, the sun slipped below the mountains. Darkness fell. But inside the small house, light burned steady, and in the cradle by the fireplace, Grace slept peacefully, dreaming of a world where justice meant something, where family was chosen, where love was stronger than hate, dreaming of the life her parents had fought to give her, the life she would inherit. Protect, pass on, blood and birthright, sacrifice and hope, endings and beginnings, all woven together in the story of one woman, one baby, one man who learned that redemption wasn't erasing the past. It was building a future worthy of those lost along the way. The end.